Young. I'm the general manager of WHIP Radio, and on behalf of the station, I would like to welcome you to Temple University's Radio Networking Summit. Here at the station, we pride ourselves on having infinite potential, and as a result, our team has put their heart and soul into planning this event to give students as well as the community an opportunity to hear straight from the professionals working within the radio and media industry. To begin today's event, we will be hearing from our wonderful keynote speaker. And once his speech concludes, the time remaining, we will open up to the floor for questions and from the attendees, and then we will transition from to our panelist sessions around 12:55. Furthermore, I am honored to introduce a man who aims to leave the world a better place than when he found it. With our over 20 years of experience working in the media and entertainment industry, he has proven to be a great leader. Currently serving as the division president of iHeartMedia, he oversees multiple regions, including New York, Philadelphia, DC, Chicago, and many more. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Scott Hobeck.
Angel, thank you so much. And thank you, Megan and Dawn and the whole group at Temple here for this opportunity to get together with you on Saturday. I appreciate that it's in Zoom, but it would be much better if we were all together in the same room. And I hope that someday real soon that that'll be the case. When I was asked by Angel and the team to prepare a keynote, I got to thinking, what is the theme of the event and where's it going to go and how can I have the greatest impact? And it reminded me of many cities ago and many, many years ago when I was first asked to speak to a college group. And when I was asked, the immediate challenge was put in front of me to not suck like all of the corporate presentations that I would see as an undergrad, where people come in and give you death by PowerPoint and just like you fall asleep, maybe learning about an industry. And I wanted to be the opposite of that. So what I did is I started journaling, and this was many years ago. And I've kept this journal going. And the journal is called Lessons. And that very first time I sat down, I wrote down all the lessons that I either learned the hard way or had to teach people from a management standpoint that I didn't learn in college. And I had a list of over 40 different lessons. And so for that initial talk, I put together what I thought was, the top 10 things I wish I knew coming out of college, entering into the workforce. That lessons journal that I have has grown to almost 100 different lessons at this point that I've either taught or learned. And it's great in different opportunities. I can pick and choose lessons and stories to help bring to life the points that I'd like to share. So today, in line with what I just said, I want to share with you 10 things that I wish I knew, when I was leaving college. And really, there are things that could make or break your career. That was the filter that I used, right? I've seen people crash and burn, and I've learned lessons that if I didn't grab onto them, I would have likely crashed and burned somewhere along my career. So hopefully that's a good path for us to take today. I see a head nodding here on the screen by Angel. Hopefully everybody else is nodding that way. But let's jump in. The first lesson that I would say that I learned, and I usually use a different example, but the first lesson I would say is write in pencil. Okay, and I say that for a reason. If I had you all together in a room, I'd ask you if you knew who Robert Burns was. And some of my literary folks or literature folks, in the meeting today will quickly say, well, he's the Shakespeare of Scotland. And that would in fact be right. And he wrote something. He actually wrote a poem to a mouse. And actually it was an apology from the point of view of the farmer to the mouse, because the farmer was plowing his field and destroyed the mouse's nest. And the whole point of that is there's a saying that comes out that it's the best laid plans of mice and men can still go wrong. And you've probably heard that quote or proverb or whatever you want to call it somewhere along the way. And the point really is, no matter how hard you work on something, It could be a great podcast. It could be a great segment for on air. It could be a great concept or strategy for the radio station. It may end up on the cutting room floor. And you have to have thick skin to kind of take that on. And we don't have to look very far. I'll go back to the beginning of January of last year, January 2020. All the plans that we had in place for last year really got scrapped, discarded, or destroyed. And specifically for the radio industry, I just want to point out a handful of things that you may be aware of or may not, but just to open this up. We're all familiar with that morning drive day part, right? 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., right? Well, insert a pandemic, and now you have people working from home. Well, that day part shifted, and the smartest, we program against data. The smartest shows that we had were starting later in some cases, or they were starting earlier, but they were extending their shows longer to meet the consumer needs. We didn't plan that at the beginning of 2020. There's something called the Pajama Effect. Those of you that follow Nielsen very closely, who measures our industry, there's a term that came out, the Pajama Effect. Well, this is basically the fact that as people worked from home, they didn't get up early. They were still wearing their pajama bottoms, even though they put a nice top on for their Zoom meetings or their Teams meetings. And when their habits changed that way, they weren't taking the people meters off of their docking stations. So in essence, what was happening was radio stations and shows weren't getting credit for the listening that was actually happening, but because the people meters were on the docking stations, it was a problem. And that helped usher in Nielsen's move towards or their help with total line reporting, which includes streaming, and creating a methodology to count headphone listening, because the listening environment changed for the consumer. Smart speakers became the big consumption product, where people were now streaming stations, whether they're live radio stations or their playlists. Podcasts took off during this COVID period. So listener habits and their tastes for different types of content had changed, and the way that they consumed it. And we didn't plan that in 2020, at least not at the level of acceleration that we experienced. And then you look at the workforce. When you look at the workforce, where we worked has changed. There's a new concept called the distributed workforce. Well, I mean, for big consultant companies that are global, that existed, but in the media industry, now it didn't matter if my producer was at home and my morning show was in New York and some was in New Jersey and some was in Connecticut. The technology allowed us to pull shows together and pulled content together in this distributed fashion, and it really made us rethink the business. Again, something that wouldn't have accelerated as quickly had not the pandemic struck us. And then finally, I would point to something that will continue to change would be our real estate needs. The size of the stations that we all operate at and the real estate that we pay for isn't quite as necessary now that we've proven through technology that we can work from home. So all that to say was, none of this stuff was planned at the beginning of 2020. However, because we're resilient as an industry, we're resilient. We're able to embrace that change and find a path forward. So, I would remind you that write in pencil, right? Just look as far as the pandemic and say, all those plans in 2020, at the beginning of 2020 were scrapped, and we had to rethink what our new normal was going to be. The next thing that I would say to you all would be, the second point would be champion your brand. And let's level set on what a brand is. I'm sure if I had all of you in a room and everybody could raise their hand and tell me what they thought a brand is, there's a lot of different definitions. But the definition that I like to use regularly is that a brand is a promise that a product or service consistently delivers on expectations. I'll say that one more time. A brand is a promise that a product or a service consistently delivers on expectations. So to make that real, when I taste a can of Coke, it tastes like Coke every single time. It meets my expectations. And when I see that logo, I know what to expect. Now, when I was coming out of school, social media wasn't a thing. Email was just becoming a thing. Now I date myself a little bit. But you all think of yourselves maybe as personal brands now because of the idea of social influencers and what social media has become to you. But you have to remember, whether you're on air, off air, whatever you're doing, when you're in the workforce, you have a brand and you need to champion your brand. And what I want to tell you about it is a personal story. Early on in my career, after I got out of business school, I was working and I had a boss who gave me radical candor. Let's say this person cared enough about me to shoot me straight, right, and say something that might be uncomfortable. And I was branded kind of as a numbers guy early on, coming out of business school. I was almost like that saying, like, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So to me, no matter what we did, because we lived in spreadsheets in business school, everything looked like it should fit in a spreadsheet, right? And even though the scope of what the ability that I had was a lot broader than just a spreadsheet, I got branded that way. So when I was up for a promotion way early on, my boss's boss kind of overlooked me for the promotion. And I didn't know why. I didn't get it. I felt like, hey, we were performing. We've got a good track record. I've got a good team. Why am I not being considered? And it wasn't until I asked for a meeting with my boss's boss to understand why I got passed over that I realized that my immediate boss had branded me as a numbers guy. And so my boss's boss saw me as a numbers guy and said, yeah, he's not going to be able to lead a team. He's more of an analyst. He's more of a numbers guy kind of person. And so I say all that because when you think about your brand and the fact that you have to champion your brand, the further you are away from the decision makers in a company, right, the different layers in the company, the further you are from where those decisions are being made, the more your brand is shaped without your knowledge. So you have to be an advocate for you. And you've got to figure out through your immediate boss and through other channels of how to promote the fact that you consistently deliver on expectations. You deliver on that brand promise that you were hired to execute against. So that would be my second piece of advice, would be, first, write in pencil. Second, champion your brand. The next one is protect your reputation. So if I was giving a PowerPoint presentation right now, I'd put up on the screen a picture of a concrete sidewalk with footsteps in it. And when you think about concrete sidewalk with footsteps, those footsteps are there for a long time. And I think that's a good metaphor for your reputation. And, a story, unfortunately, in my career, in one of my markets, we had a salesperson that was struggling. And, radio stations oftentimes will do barter deals with restaurants and different locations in order to get some merchandise in lieu of cash. And so this salesperson, they were struggling. They schemed up a way to steal business cards, or not business cards, but gift cards, basically. And a horrible decision. And what I want to point to is that short-term thinking has long-term consequences. And particularly in that cases, those decisions you make in the heat of the moment, you can call that certainly an ethical decision. Those decisions live with you like that concrete, the footprints in the concrete that I talked about in the beginning. So protect that reputation. As you're building your brand, realize that your reputation is also shaped by the things you decide to do and the things you decide not to do. So don't lose sight of that. The next thing as a lesson that I would share for the group would be to know the difference between a problem and a symptom. So think about that for a second, the difference between a problem and a symptom. I would say that most people that I deal with come to me with symptoms, right? They don't come to me with core problems. And it's interesting because when you're in school, right, the teacher or the professor gives you the problem. The professor has the answer, and the professor will help you along the way to get that answer if you're struggling. In the business world, it's a little bit different, right? The boss expects you to find the problem and define it well, and then expects you to come up with the solution and then present it back with kind of variety of different levels of risk against it. So it's a little bit different model out when you get out in your career from your undergrad position, because the problems aren't readily defined for you. And I think it was Einstein. I know a lot of people were credited with this, but he said something like, a problem well defined is 90% solved. And when you think of that, that really gets into making sure you're not just treating symptoms, that you're getting to the root cause of the problems. And, you know, your economic value as an employee comes from your ability to get stuff done. And if part of what your job is, yeah, you know, part of it's going to be, hey, there's smooth sailing, I got to do X, Y, and Z, but you're going to run into problems every day, if not every week. And you've got to figure out, is this a true problem or is it a symptom of something greater? And if you want to advance your career quickly, you have to figure out how to get to the root cause. And there are many ways to do that. You can Google 5 whys and Aristotelian principles and things like that in terms of getting the root cause. But I teach my senior leaders to think in root cause, because I don't want to be chasing symptoms around. We need to shut things down at the root in order to have sustainable growth. So remember that there is a difference between a problem and a symptom, and you could use this in your personal life. Next issue that comes up, say to yourself, is this a symptom of something greater? Can I set my watch to the fact that this is going to happen next week at the same time? If it is, you're looking at trends now, and that trend points back to really what the core problem is. And that's going to really help you create, you know, sustainable change and advance your career quickly. Because the people that can fix things, I'll tell you point blank, advance quickly. All right, the next point, I'll say we're almost halfway there, because this is point number 5, would be remember that only God knows everything. And I'm not, you know, this isn't going to be a sermon here. If you got offended by me saying God, you could put Google in there and say only Google knows everything. We could have a separate discussion about God at a different point. But you need to embrace the fact that you're not going to know everything. I'm over 20 years in my career, and I learn new things weekly, right? And the story I would share with you against this to tee up the lesson would be, I had an interviewee ask me a question once years ago, and it stuck with me. And the interviewee said to me, listen, Scott, if somebody fails here at your organization, why is it that they would fail? Right? Do you see like a pattern with people that don't stay here? And I thought that was an insightful question. Don't know if it was a coached question or that person was, you know, just that insightful. But the question was a good one. And my answer to that question was like, the people that generally fail out of a position are the ones that think they have to know everything before they do something. And my advice to them was, get out there and scrape your knees. You got to go out there and try different things. You got to take some risks, you know, calculated risk. You've got to try things in your position, knowing full well you don't have all the answers. But then the goal would be to come back and take what you learned and then apply it in a greater way. So what I would say is, you know, yes, remember, only God knows everything, but put yourself in the right spot and say, you're never going to know everything, and you can't let that paralyze you, right? You need to step away from that feeling like, oh, I've got to know everything, because you won't. I'll tell you, I still don't in my career. And you got to step away from that and scrape your knees. The next point that I would say to you would be to run into the fire. I have some friends that are firefighters or serve in that capacity, and I think of them in that way when I think about this you know, lesson, if you want to call it that. And when you're faced with an issue or a crisis, right? You have, you know, I'll be polarizing here a little bit. You probably have more decisions than 2, but I'll say you have 2 major decisions. You could either stick your head in the sand like an ostrich, or you could run into the fire like a firefighter. And I'll tell you, I have such respect for those first responders in that case that against every fiber in their body that is probably saying, no, you don't run into fire. you're going to get burnt, you're going to get hurt, you're going to die. These people, despite that, run into fires. And at a point in my career early on, when I actually, this is great because we're talking to Temple. I worked in Philadelphia. I worked at that point for CBS Radio, and I worked with the Philadelphia Eagles radio network. So any of you that have listened to a Philadelphia Eagles game and heard Merrill Reese and Mike Quick on the radio, they were my boys, and I worked with them on the sales capacity and the sales management capacity. And it was very early on in my career, and I did a deal with a local fur company. And I had, if you remember, AJ Feely, who was like, I think, a third string backup quarterback. He ended up playing somewhere after the Eagles, and he was dating at that point Heather Mitz, who Heather was a U.S. Olympic soccer player. Anyway, cute couple. They found some media time, whatever, and I did an endorsement deal where I lined them up to endorse this fur and leather company. And me and my dumbness, let's just call it that. I paid the dumb tax on this one. I was like, you know what? If I get agents involved in this deal, it's just going to lengthen the deal. It's it might even scare the client away. It's going to be a mess. Let me just broker the deal myself between AJ, Heather, and this company. And this is one of those scenarios where you don't know what you don't know. But I was willing to scrape my knees and move forward. Turned out that there was a dispute in terms of who was going to get what by when, and I won't go into the details. We ended up working it out, but I had a boss at that point that I went to and said, hey, listen, I'm in a real bind here with this client and with AJ and Heather. I need you to help me out. Will you, come on, will you make a phone call? Will you step in here? He's like, I'll help you out. All right. He's like, go make the phone call. And he pushed me into the fire when every feeling that I had at that point, it was kind of the biggest mistake that I had made to that point. He's like, no, you're going to learn by getting into the fire. And the takeaway of that whole situation was we resolved the situation. From a business standpoint, I picked up the principle that good fences make great neighbors. And I think contracts help to create good fences, which I mean, good understanding of whose is what, so to speak. That was good from the business standpoint, but from a personal standpoint and really, an ethical standpoint, if you will, it really pointed out the fact that when you run into a crisis or a problem, instead of sticking your head in the sand, it shows your character, because problems are going to happen all the time. And on behalf of the company, that manager did the right thing, pushing me into that issue or that situation to handle it. He knew I was equipped to do it. I hadn't done it before, but he was getting me out of my comfort zone. But in the end, had the foresight to know that, you know what, we're going to come out better as a company because we hit the problem dead on. And you know what, we'll probably build a good relationship out of it. And sure enough, both of those things happen. So from that standpoint, remember, run into the fire. When there's a crisis or an issue, you may run away. You might not have the wiring of a firefighter, but I'm telling you, in the business sense, run into that, because it's going to help to build your character. It's going to help to build your credibility and the relationships with the people that you're dealing with, either in your station or media company, and outside if you work with vendors or clients. So the seventh point that I would bring on this list would be careful that success is the devil. And usually when I say that, I get a couple heads nodding in the audience because they've learned that lesson along the way. And success is the devil because it breeds complacency. When you're sitting high on the top of the heap and the view is awesome, it's easy to forget all the things that you need to do to stay successful. And whether you're in a sales position, whether you're in a programming position and you're doing really well, now all of a sudden you're not going to show prep as much, or in your sales and you got some great deals and they're booked and you got great, you're having a banner year in revenue. If you don't continue to do those things that got you there, you're quickly going to fall off that pedestal. And my cousin, who's a little bit older than I am, owns and runs a roofing company in Pennsylvania. And he would always say the best time to fix your roof is when it's sunny outside. And think about that. It's 100% true. If he went golfing and fishing when it was sunny outside, his business would fall apart because he wouldn't have the right environment to go ahead and do all the roofing jobs he needed to do to grow his business. And so I would say, you know, in your life and in your job, whether it be your first year in your job or your 30th year in your job, when things are going well, that's the time to reinvent yourself. That's the time to rethink what your competitors could be doing to kind of chop your legs out, or that competitive person that, you know, you might work with as a colleague is trying to get ahead of you. Like, you need to own your game when you're at the top of it, because you stutter at all, or you forget or become complacent, therein lies the fall. So my next point, again, eighth point, as we're rounding through here, would be find yourself a mentor. If we were in a group setting here where I could see you all, I would ask, how many of you have a mentor at this point? And many hands would go up. Make sure you find yourself a mentor inside the business that you decide to go into, and outside the business. And I'll give you an example of an outside the business mentor. And it really comes back to this point that, you know, you don't know what you don't know, right? And it kind of sounds weird to say that, but you really don't. You don't know what you don't know, but a mentor can help you see things that you wouldn't normally see. And I'll go back to and this is a dad story, so you'll have to just bear with me. I'll go quick. When I was 12, my dad took us, and he would take us regularly, but I remember this one time specifically when I was 12. We would go to Gananoque in Ontario, Canada, fishing. And we had a little boat, a little 14-foot boat with a 10 horsepower motor that you sat in the back and, you know, ran with one arm. But we would go bass fishing up there on Lake Gananoque. And we went out one particular day, and it's not a massive lake, but keep in mind, I'm talking about a 14-foot boat. Well, a storm struck up, and it really started to get wavy. And for those of you that have been in a 14-foot outboard, 10 horsepower motor, if you start to get waves that are a couple feet, 3 feet high, and you're 12 years old, it feels like, you know, you're, seeing 30-foot waves. And my dad always used to drive the boat. So he would sit in the back, and he was probably twice my weight at that time when I was 12, and I would sit in the front. So naturally, the back part of the boat was heavier with the motor. And my father being twice my weight, I wasn't doing much to balance it off when I sat in the front of the boat. And so that was the normal course of action. When these waves started hitting, I thought the boat was going to go backwards, because you hit a 2-foot or a 3-foot wave and the weight is in the back, it's really coming up. So my dad said, "Son, you're going to drive." And I'm like, I don't drive when it's nice out. What do you mean I'm going to drive? So he had me go back, and we kind of through the waves, like, worked our way. He sat in the front where he could counterbalance the weight, put me in the back to drive for the first time in a storm. And I was probably maybe 10 feet out from the shoreline, 15, 20, maybe, as I remember it, but close enough to the shoreline that there would be stumps or trees or rocks. And here's me driving the boat for the first time, or captaining, or whatever you would call maneuvering the boat for the first time as a 12-year-old, in a storm with my dad at front. He had the confidence in me, but him sitting at the front, he would just point left or right, because I couldn't really hear that well, because of the storm and the motor. Whether he wanted me to go left or right to avoid a stump or a tree branch or a rock in the water. And I just remember that time where, had I not had him mentoring me in that moment, right, I probably never would have gotten through that tough situation. And it reminds me of a quote that many of you probably have heard, that a calm sea doesn't make a skillful sailor, right? So if you're a sailor and all you face is calm seas, okay, you got the point from point A to point B, but you really develop your skills when you go through the difficult times. And the difficult times, more than anything, is where you need a mentor. And I would encourage you all, find a mentor. Find at least one mentor. Find a mentor in the business, outside of the business. They're going to help you, just like my dad did in the front of the boat, pointing left and pointing right, to keep you from running into rocks as you navigate your career. The ninth point that I have here, and we're all technologically savvy at this point in our lives and our careers, I want to talk to you about the most important operating system. And you all, when I say operating system, you're either thinking of the laptop or the tablet or the smartphone that you're on right now. Well, yeah, I'm talking about an operating system just like that. And I want to tell you that culture is the most important operating system that you'll face in your career going forward. Because culture in business trumps strategy. Okay? And I liken it to an operating system in a computer. If you have a computer with a bad operating system on it, and all of you are too young to remember Windows 2000, when Windows 2000 or Windows ME came out, it was crashed, it was buggy, it crashed, it had a horrible user experience. It didn't matter how good PowerPoint as a program or Microsoft Word as a program was. If the operating system was buggy, those programs weren't going to work. Same thing in business. If you have a bad culture, which is the operating system of the business, it doesn't matter how good your programs or your strategies or your content is. It doesn't matter. You're not going to have sustainable growth. So I bring this up and I underscore that point because a lot of times when I'm interviewing folks, they'll ask about, and you may do the same thing, they'll ask about, well, what's the culture like at iHeart? And many of you will ask that question. I want you to do more than ask that question. I want you to research and find out what the core values are for that company, because the core values in that company, the things that they live and die by every day, are the things that shape that culture. And if your core values are at odds with their core values, you're going to have an awful experience there. So I want you to think, don't ask the culture question because you think it's a great question in an interview. I want you to really dig in. And then once you dig in, I want you to be real honest with yourself about the core values that you have, right? Because a lot of times I'll flip the question, I'll answer the question, and then I'll flip the question back on the candidate and say, what kind of culture do you think you can thrive in? And sometimes the candidate will go back on their feet and they won't really have an answer. Especially if they haven't been in the workforce for a long time. So I want you to think about that question because it's so important. Because a lot of times I'll hear, well, I want to be in a collaborative culture where everybody kind of works together. And I think that's great. But you have to remember that every core value has a flip side of accountability. Okay. So what I would say is the opposite, I don't want to say the opposite, but the flip side of a collaborative environment is accountability. You can collaborate all day long and be in these great brainstorm meetings, but if nobody's accountable for a result, all you did was just have an entertaining brainstorm meeting. So when you're asking for collaboration, realize that you're also asking for accountability. And so when you're trying to justify or rationalize your core values with the company core values, you need to be thinking of both sides of that. Another one is like, I want to have clear spaces to create and innovate. That's great. And I love that as a core value for a company and for a personal, core value. But realize that when you're asking for that space to innovate and create in a company, that also comes with discipline. Because if you don't have discipline when you're creating, all those wonderful creations don't turn into anything because you don't have the discipline to execute on the plans. Others say, well, I want an open door policy with my boss. Great. And I'm an open door person. I'll talk to everybody and anybody in the company because I want them to know, my perspective on whatever the question or challenge that they're having. But they have to realize that an open door policy is a two-way street. And I mentioned the word radical candor earlier in the discussion. If you want an open door policy to come in and tell me anything that you want to tell me, which I really want, you also have to have the skin to realize that you're going to get radical candor or you're going to get comments back. And if you're not prepared to embrace those maybe constructive criticism or constructive comments that could come from it, then do you really want, that open door policy, or do you just want a one-way street on it? So think about that. We could go on and on about different core values that companies have to set their culture, but I don't want you to ask that question in an interview and just sit on it and just wait for the other person. I want you to have done your homework. I want you to know what your core values are, and you're going to end up in the right place for you when that culture is right, when that operating system is right, that culture is good. All of the talents and skills that you bring to that job are going to flourish. When that culture isn't right, it's you're gonna have a hard time. So that would be my comment on the most critical operating system. It isn't necessarily the one on your phone or your tablet. And the last thing that I would say as a piece of advice, because we're 35 minutes in, we want to have some questions maybe, is my comment would be to lean into the gap. Okay, and that doesn't mean anything to you initially, but I want to tell you that, and you all know this. Your parents or mentors or counselors have said this. You're embarking, once you graduate, on a relatively blank slate that you're going to have right now. When you come out, your career and what you are able to do and what you want to do, it is blank slate. You could take it whatever direction that you want to go, and that's an opportunity, of course, if you look at it positively, but it can also become a waste. Okay, and what I mean by that is, if you're not willing to embrace the gap between who you are today and who you have the potential to become, it actually becomes a waste. You put blinders on. So I would say that to all of you, and I say it and remind myself, I remind my kids of this. The biggest wasted opportunity, or the biggest waste in our lives right now, is that gap between who we are and who we have the potential to become. Some of us have real wide gaps. I say that I have a real wide gap. Some of us might have more narrow gaps, but we all have a gap there. And we need to use our mentors. We need to use people that we trust as bosses. We need to look for that constructive feedback. Be brave. Seek that feedback that's necessary. Embrace it if it's not something you want to hear. Take your, one of the tactics that I use personally when I hear something I don't want to hear, I tell myself, okay, I might not agree with what I'm hearing, but let's just assume I'm wrong. And my perspective is completely wrong. What could possibly make the feedback that I heard right? And I try to, and it's hard to do, but in that moment of constructive feedback or issue or thing that you hear, suspend what your current thoughts are about it and just look at that as if it's the only thing you know, and really do soul searching against that. Because like I said, the greatest gap in your life is that one that's between who you are now and who you have the potential to become. So once you close that gap, once you align yourself with the right people, you're off to the races, which would probably go back to Angel's earlier comment. And I know I'll butcher it, but you mentioned something like infinite possibilities in the beginning. You said something like that. I was listening to you. I didn't know what you were going to say, but to bring it full circle, you talked about infinite possibility. Well, that infinite possibility can be realized if you embrace that gap between who you are today and have the potential to become. So I'll stop down there. I think we're about 40 minutes in and we had 50 slated. So if there are any questions, it could be about anything I said or didn't say, something that popped in your mind. I'm happy to spend the rest of the time answering questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Scott, for all of the great advice that you had given. At this time, if anyone wants to drop a question in the Q&A section, that'd be great. I know we have one question currently. So the first question is, can you give advice about building your personal brand so that you can champion it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's funny. I made a comment earlier about the things we do and the things we don't do, that help to shape our reputation and which really helps to shape our brand. I have a story about somebody who, this was a number of years ago in a different city, but it was a sales assistant who was a superstar, who we brought over from a legal firm, who had been working there for maybe 2 or 3 years. She had come over to us, and we couldn't at the moment pay her what she was getting paid at the legal firm, but there was a path to get there. We just couldn't do it with the P&L. We couldn't do it at that moment. But she really wanted to get with our into our industry, so she took the job. And so she was with us maybe 6 or 8 months, and I had an opportunity where I found some money in the budget that I was going to be able to prop her up. However, I found this money during a time when we weren't hiring, and we had a freeze on hiring and a freeze on raise because we were trying to hit a number, right? So even though I had the money available to do it, and it was the right thing because we had made a promise and she took a leap and she was really strong, I'm like, okay, I got it cleared. We could do this. So we pulled her into the office along with her immediate supervisor and then the sales manager of the department that she worked at. And we're all sitting in the office and we explained the scenario. We're like, listen, we want to give you this this bump up because we know you took the job and came over to us. You have great skills, and we want to get you to that level where you left at. But here's the deal: we're going to give you this money, but you can't talk about it because everybody knows we're kind of in a freeze right now because we were running through kind of a rough period in the economy at that time. She's like, okay, great, thank you so much. That night, she posted it on Facebook. And so in her mind, she didn't think she was, I don't know why she would do that, but she didn't think she said it to anybody. But the next day, this comes to our attention, puts us in a difficult position with the rest of the assistants and the rest of the team on there. And sadly, this star person, we had to fire immediately because of those actions. And how does that get back to building your brand? So you have to be really conscious of the things you decide to do and you don't decide to do in building that brand. Now, what I would say would be when you're very focused on what your brand wants to be, you've got to determine first, is your boss, what kind of champion is your boss? Is your boss the kind of person that, mirrors your work up and, up in the organization? If that's the case, then you have an easier path to building your brand. You figure out your communication style with your boss. Every boss is looking for, the things they're excited about to share with their boss or the challenges that they're having. If you give them something to be excited about, hey, this project we're working on is really great, or this content got a bunch of hits, or this podcast is starting to take off, or whatever it is that you're doing, and you frame it up the right way for your boss, and that boss is a mirror for you and reflects that up to other folks, that's going to help start building your brand. If you don't, and this is another real scenario, if you realize that you have a boss that takes all the credit for themselves, which they exist out there, or isn't really a sell up kind of person, they kind of keep to themselves to a degree and focus on their knitting and their P&L or what have you, you're in a tougher spot. And now you have to find other champions. So if you have another mentor in the building, that's why I say get a mentor in your industry and one outside of your industry. Specifically, if you can find one in your company, your mentor can and will help to champion you inside of an organization. You just got to figure out how to succinctly share, going back to that brand we talked about. You are a promise that you consistently deliver on expectations. If you consistently deliver on expectations, finding the communication style of your mentor, your boss, or your boss's boss, if you get exposure, so that you're not obnoxious, but you're still building your brand. That's the way you would go about doing it. It's another discussion, and I don't know if this was the essence of your question of like, how do we build a brand? Like, what are the things that you want your brand to stand for? You got to start to think about like, what are those key brand attributes that you want to be known for? Is it thoughtfulness? Is it problem solving? Is it analytics? Is it like, you've got to decide which area is your lane. And once you start deciding your brand attributes, then you can focus kind of your personal case studies and your personal wins and your personal growth in those areas. And when you share that to the right channels, your brand will start to develop. So hopefully I answered that well. If not, you can hit me with a follow-up.
Yeah, that was great. And I have a couple questions here regarding mentors. A couple of those questions being, how do you know if you found the right mentor? What should I do, or how do I look for a mentor? And also, there's another question that says, is it ever too late to find a mentor? It can feel like we're late to the game, or is it something that just comes in time?
Great. Lots of great questions. I've seen a couple different sides of that question, so I'll try to, or I should say, I've seen a couple different sides of mentor programs. I've seen mentor programs that have been structured, and it's like, okay, everybody, you're going to have a mentor, and you're going to pick somebody in the company, and like, not everybody is into being mentored, and not everybody is into mentoring people. Some people aren't as either caring or giving, or in some cases don't have the courage or find it difficult to have the courage to give constructive feedback. Those people, ideally won't be a fit. So if there's the first thing I would say is if the company you go to has a structured mentor program, look into it. Find out, and I would ask questions about it and find out, like, hey, who are some successful people that are being mentored now? Who are some of the most successful and most open mentors? And maybe kind of look for time on their calendar, to explore the possibility. Then I would say, make sure I think of somebody that I'm mentoring in New York right now. And she is new into the business and new into the sales force. And one of the things that we wanted to get straight from the beginning is, it doesn't matter what my title is or your title is in this situation. What is it that you want to accomplish in your career? And then I wanted her to be interested in what I wanted to be accomplish in my career. And from the very first discussion, if those things didn't line up, like if she was either intimidated or didn't want to help me with the things that I'm trying to grow at, then that would start to tell me that this mentor relationship wouldn't work. So that would kind of be a red flag. And it works on both sides. So I think early discussions help to set that up, but it starts with clear expectations. So any mentoring discussion would be, hey, what do you want to get out of this as the mentee? And the mentor, what do you want to get out of this as the mentor? And if you can both agree that, the frequency that we meet and the kind of things that we discuss are in line and we can add value to each other, then that relationship starts to form, and then it can blossom. It can go in a bunch of different directions from there.
Awesome.
Did I hit all of the answers there, or did I miss any? Please tell me.
No, I think you hit all of them. But another question, or we got a couple of questions regarding this topic. For internships and jobs in the radio right now, one of the questions was, what is your recommendation to students and to soon-to-be graduates who want to get into the business during this time? And another question was, what advice would you give out to students trying to get internships to make it in the industry?
Yeah, great points. So here's where I'll start with that one. And this is a tough one because I've gotten these since COVID started. Our world of internships have kind of changed. We talked about distributed workforce, and now people not really being in the office, and now this concept of hybrid workforce, where not everybody is going to be in the office moving forward, even as we come out of COVID. It makes that internship question a little bit more difficult. I would say, number one, in our company, we have paid internship programs. They're highly competitive. One, because they're paid, but two, because we're the company we are, and we're moving the direction we are with not just broadcast, but with podcast and everything else. So they are competitive. The challenge is, though, once COVID hit, we stopped the program because we're not in the office. And a lot of that work happened with the shows in the office, building camaraderie. So the first thing I would say is, stay real close to, I'm not sure if I know many companies are in that spot right now, at least in the media side. I don't know if all of them are, but the companies that you're looking at, just, I would say, stay close and determine, like, when they fully come back to office after COVID, what the new policy is on internships. We're committed and love to find new talent and bring new talent through internships. There's even scholarship programs out there. This is the second point that I would want to make, like the New York State broadcasters, the Philadelphia Philadelphia State or the Pennsylvania State Broadcasters Association. There are different associations that are out there. Many of them have grants that they'll offer to radio stations for paid internship programs. You can reach out to the broadcast associations if you're looking as another angle to get in or to have a feel on it. To determine if they have any grant money specific. Sometimes they'll have internships at their level in broadcasting, and you could get then plucked out of one of the associations. So that's another angle for you. When you're coming in, the best advice that I've given to interns that I've talked to either clients of ours that have kids that want to get into the business, or just straight up people that have hit me up for internships in the business. A lot of the interns come in, particularly because coming out of school, you're so familiar with all the social tools and Adobe and Pro Tools, and you're creating videos on your phones and editing and doing all that kind of great stuff that we're all kind of doing right now. But I recently spoke to somebody. It was great. I think we're at the top of the hour, or we're at the end of our time right now. Do we still have a couple more minutes, or?
Yeah, we have a couple minutes.
Okay.
We're going to give it till 12:55 before I direct people.
Okay, great. So I was right before COVID hit, I was in a restaurant on an interview with somebody for one of my markets across the country, and the person at the front desk, or the I guess you'd call them receptionist or hostess, heard me and the gentleman talking about radio. And when we were finished eating, very politely said, "Hey, listen, I'm in the broadcast major in such and such a school." It was really well done. Like, she didn't interrupt the discussion. It was when we were paying and leaving. She's like, "I'm sorry, but I overheard you all talking and I'm looking to break into the business." I applauded her courage. With my schedule, I had a fault because of her courage and her politeness in the way that she did it. I had a follow-up discussion with her on the phone, coaching her on what she should do to get an internship. And then after she put together kind of her samples, I reviewed them for her and gave her more advice and connected her with the right person. So sometimes it's having just the courage to talk to different people and the right tact in doing so. And she's committed to the industry, had some specific thoughts about content as to how she can contribute. So I bring that example up, one, for the courage, but two, about the specificity. If you're coming into the space, right, and you want to work for Z100 in New York, or Q in Philadelphia, or whatever the station is, I would be coming as an intern saying, "Hey, listen, here's how I can help you amplify your content that you're already creating, or here's some content ideas that I would use if I was an intern at WIP," and actually show work that you would do if you were in the seat. Because too many people are like, have their hand out asking for an internship, and not a lot of people are coming forward with their own creativity saying, "Hey, I would do," and you know what? The station may never use it, but you'll make yourself stand out by thinking down the field of like, here's how I could apply myself to the job. And if you have a great idea, that puts you even further in the front of the line.
Thank you very much. We do have a couple of other questions, but due to our time restraints, I know we will be sharing the contact sheet to all attendees after, which has Scott's LinkedIn profile connected to there. So if you guys do have questions and want to reach out to him, if you're ever so willing to respond to those, I'm sure everyone would appreciate it. But yeah, thank you so much for attending. And yeah, I'm going to share my screen now to show the QR code to get to the next breakout sessions. Scott, thank you again for coming and speaking with us. We really appreciate it here at WHIP, and I'm sure all the attendees in the community as well. All right.
Great. Thank you, Angel. Thank you, everybody, for having me, Megan, Dawn, and the whole group for staying tuned for the whole piece.